The corn crib stank of dust and decay. Emma Reese hung from the roof beam by her bound wrists, rope fibers biting through swollen skin until she could no longer distinguish pain from numbness. Her bare toes scraped at the packed earth below, seeking purchase and finding none. Every time her grip on consciousness slipped, her body dropped another quarter-inch, and the rough hemp tore deeper into raw flesh. Around her, dried corn husks rustled in the hot wind that pressed through gaps in the plank walls. The sound was like whispers, like the voices of women who had come before her and vanished. Through a broken slat, she could see a strip of sky bleeding from gold to crimson as the sun settled toward the western horizon. August heat pressed down on the Nebraska with a weight that crushed hope as surely as it crushed the breath from her lungs. Outside, boots scraped gravel. Henrik Lund, called Bear Claw by every man between here and the Missouri, swung into his saddle with the easy confidence of a man who owned everything he touched. He was broad-shouldered and sun-darkened with 3 jagged scars raking down his left cheek, where it was said a grizzly had marked him before he put a knife through its eye. The scars gave his face a permanent expression of cruel amusement. He glanced back at the corn crib, then spoke quietly, his voice carrying that dangerous softness that made Emma's blood run cold. "You think about what I said, Emma. Tomorrow I'll come back with the deed, and you'll sign it with gratitude in your heart. This is difficult, I know. But sacrifice is the price of civilization. The women who came before you understood that in the end. I have faith you will too." He had left a single earthenware jug of water on a crate just inside the door, 3 feet beyond her reach. It was close enough to see close enough to smell the dampness of the clay, but impossibly far. A deliberate cruelty calculated to break her will without spilling blood where it might be questioned. Bear Claw wheeled his horse and rode toward the northern fence line with 2 of his hired men, Dark Dave and a younger hand, whose name Emma had never learned. Their hoofbeats faded into the dry prairie silence. She was alone. A rattlesnake slid from beneath the crib's foundation, its scaled body thick as a man's wrist. It coiled near Emma's dangling feet tongue, flicking the air. She jerked her legs upward, thigh muscles screaming, and held them drawn against her body until cramps seized her from hip to knee. When she could hold no longer, she let them drop. The snake, disturbed by the motion, slithered toward a shadowed corner and disappeared. Emma's vision blurred. The crimson sky turned the color of old blood. She thought of the immigrant train that had brought her west 3 weeks earlier, of the folded letter, promising a homestead, a hard-working husband, and a partnership in building the new Eden. She had been a fool to believe it. A fool to think that any man who advertised for a wife in an Eastern newspaper wanted anything more than a signature on a legal document. She closed her eyes and tried to pray, but the words would not come. Her throat was too dry, and hope seemed very far away. Across the parched grassland, miles to the northwest, Tasunke followed the shrinking thread of Storm Creek. The water that had once run strong and clear through Lakota country now barely trickled over stones, choked by the earthen dam Bear Claw had thrown across it a month earlier. Tasunke studied the dam with the careful eye of a man who knew that water meant life, and that theft of water was theft of breath itself. He was 26 summers old, lean and weathered, with high cheekbones and dark eyes that missed little. He wore fringed buckskin leggings and a trade cloth shirt, and his long black hair was bound back with a strip of red flannel. No feathers decorated his hair today. He rode alone and did not wish to announce himself to watching eyes. His people's fields upstream were turning brown. Corn withered in the heat. Horses had to be driven farther each day to find water. The elders spoke in low voices around the night fires, debating whether to tear down the dam and risk open war, or to send runners to the Indian agent at Fort Kearny and beg for intervention that would never come. Tasunke's younger brother had been shot dead a year earlier near this same creek. 2 of Bear Claw's cowhands had claimed the boy was stealing cattle. No trial, no questions. Just a shallow grave and a warning delivered to the Lakota camp: stay on your side of the line, or more will die. Now Tasunke rode the boundary between survival and extinction, studying the way the white men carved up the land with their papers and wire and dams. He had learned some of their language in trade, enough to understand the words property and deed and trespassing. Enough to know that the words were weapons sharper than any knife. As he followed the creek's bend, his horse pricked its ears forward and snorted. Tasunke reined in and listened. A faint sound carried on the wind, rhythmic, and muffled the thud of something or someone struggling. He urged his mount forward, circling wide around a sagging wooden structure that leaned like a drunk against the prairie wind. The corn crib. He had seen it before from a distance, but had never approached. Now the sound was louder, unmistakable. A low cry, hoarse and desperate. Tasunke dismounted and approached on foot. Through a jagged gap in the boards, he saw a pair of eyes staring back at him from the shadows, wide with terror and pain. A woman, white. Her wrists were bound and hoisted above her head, her dress filthy and torn, her face bruised. He kicked the door. The rusted iron latch snapped, and the door slammed inward, exploding dust into the slanting sunlight. The woman collapsed to the floor as the rope tied carelessly to a loose beam gave way under the shock. She scrabbled backward against the cracked wall, gasping arms cradled against her chest. Tasunke knelt in front of her, silhouetted against the dying light. His shadow fell across her like a blanket. She flinched and then stilled, staring up at him, as if uncertain whether rescue or death had arrived. He saw the raw wounds on her wrists, the rope burns that wept clear fluid, the bruises darkening her jaw. He saw the water jug on the crate still sealed, and understood immediately what kind of man had left her here. "You stay," he said quietly in careful English. "You die. Come with me. Maybe live." Her breath came in ragged shudders. She nodded, unable to speak. Tasunke pulled a knife from his belt. The woman's eyes widened, but he turned the blade and sawed through the rope around her wrists with quick, efficient strokes. When the bonds fell away, she whimpered and cradled her arms against her body. He tore strips from the hem of his own shirt and began wrapping them around the worst of the wounds. His hands were steady, but when he looked at the deep grooves the rope had carved into her flesh, scars that would never fully heal, something shifted in his dark eyes. Recognition. He had seen such marks before, though not from rope. His brother's wrists had borne the marks of iron chains before he died. He did not speak, but his fingers lingered for just a moment on the edge of the raw skin, a gesture so brief and gentle it might have been imagined. Then he finished the binding and helped her to her feet. "Can you stand?" She tried. Her legs buckled. He caught her before she fell and lifted her easily, carrying her out into the open air. She weighed almost nothing, all bone and exhaustion. He set her down in the shade of the crib's outer wall and brought the water jug. She drank in desperate gulps, choking, and he pulled it away before she could make herself sick. Boot steps crunched in the distance. Tasunke flattened against the wall, pulling the woman behind him. A man in a dusty hat and gun belt approached from the direction of the main house, whistling tunelessly. Dark Dave Bear Claw's foreman. He was making his evening rounds, checking the stock and buildings before supper. Tasunke pressed a finger to his lips and eased the woman deeper into the shadow. She held her breath, eyes fixed on the approaching figure. Dave walked past the crib's front door without glancing inside, but as he turned to head back, a loose board under his boot shifted. The entire wall groaned, planks threatening to collapse inward. Tasunke braced his shoulder against the buckling timber muscles, straining. Splinters dug into his skin. The woman beside him pressed both hands against the boards, adding her slight weight. For a long moment, the structure hung in balance, creaking. Then Dave's footsteps moved on, fading toward the bunkhouse. Tasunke exhaled slowly and eased his shoulder away. The wall held. He looked at the woman and saw determination in her bruised face, a hardness that had not been there when he first found her. "We go now," he said. She nodded and followed him into the failing light. 3 weeks earlier, Emma Reese had stepped off the Union Pacific passenger car onto the raw pine planks of Sagebrush Station. She was 23 years old, slender and fair-haired, with gray eyes that had learned wariness long before she crossed the Missouri. Her father had died in a Pittsburgh mill accident when she was 16. Her mother had remarried a man who drank and struck anyone within reach. Emma had worked as a seamstress and laundress, saving every coin until she could afford passage west. The letter had arrived in the spring, written in a careful, elegant hand, and signed by Henrik Lund. He was a rancher. He wrote a homesteader with 160 acres under the Homestead Act and ambitions for more. He sought a wife of good character, capable hands, and steady temperament. He promised not just security, but a partnership in building what he called a beacon of civilization in the wilderness. The language was lofty, almost biblical. Emma, lonely and desperate for something better, had believed every word. Now standing on the depot platform with dust swirling around her skirts, she had her first good look at the man who would be her husband. Bear Claw Lund was tall and broad, with hands like iron, and eyes that assessed her the way a man assesses livestock. But when he spoke, his voice was gentle, almost kind. "Miss Reese, welcome. I trust your journey was not too arduous." He took her trunk without waiting for an answer and loaded it into a wagon bed already half filled with barbed wire and fence posts. "You look strong and capable. That speaks well of your character. This territory requires strength, you see. Not everyone is suited to the work ahead." Emma climbed onto the wagon seat and said nothing. She had learned early that silence was safer than speech. The ride to the ranch took 2 hours. They passed fields of dry grass, scattered cattle, and long stretches of new fence strung tight across the open range. At the edge of Lund's property, she saw Storm Creek reduced to a thin silver thread, winding through cracked earth. Beyond it, a massive earthen dam rose like a scar across the water's path. "I built that with my own hands, and a dozen hired men." Lund said, his voice thick with quiet pride. "It is a monument to human ingenuity. The Indians upstream have squatted on good land for generations, taking what they did not earn, contributing nothing to the march of progress. Now they will learn the value of industry and order. It is a kindness, really, to teach them." Emma glanced at him, uneasy, stirring in her chest. But the water was theirs first, wasn't it? Lund's hand moved so quickly, she did not see it coming. He gripped her wrist not violently, but with steady, inexorable pressure that made her gasp. He did not raise his voice. That made it worse. "Emma, darling," he said softly, eyes still on the road ahead. "I can see you have a compassionate heart. That is admirable in a woman. But compassion without wisdom is dangerous. The savage does not understand ownership. He does not build, does not improve, does not honor the covenant between man and the land. My duty, our duty, is to bring order to chaos. Do you understand?" He released her wrist and smiled, as if they had been discussing the weather. Emma rubbed her wrist and looked away, her heart pounding with the first cold touch of fear. The ranch house was larger than she had expected, 2 stories of weathered clapboard with a wide porch and a stone chimney. But the outbuildings were rough, a sagging barn, a crooked bunkhouse, and at the far edge of the yard, the corn crib that would later become her prison. Inside the house, Lund showed her to a small bedroom upstairs. "You will sleep here until we are properly married," he said. "Reverend Collier comes through once a month. He will be here Sunday. I trust you will use the time to reflect on the sacred covenant you are about to enter." That night, Emma lay awake on a narrow bed and listened to the wind howl across the prairie. She thought about the letter that had promised partnership and purpose, and she wondered what other lies it contained. On Sunday, Reverend Collier arrived in a dusty buggy, clutching a Bible and smelling faintly of whiskey. He was a thin man with watery eyes, who mumbled the marriage ceremony as if he had said the words 1,000 times and no longer heard them. Emma signed her name in the church registry, Emma Reese, and watched Bearclaw sign his. The Reverend pronounced them man and wife, pocketed the fee Lund handed him, and drove away, without meeting her eyes. The next morning, Lund took Emma into Sagebrush. He led her into the land office, a cramped building that smelled of ink and tobacco, and placed a form in front of her. "This is your homestead claim," he said, his tone patient, almost fatherly. "Every unmarried woman who files gets 160 acres in her maiden name. It is federal law designed to encourage settlement. A wise policy, truly. We will file this today, and in 5 years after you have made the required improvements, the land becomes yours outright. It is an extraordinary opportunity." Emma read the form carefully. It listed a parcel along Storm Creek, several miles upstream from Lund's main holdings. "Where exactly is this land?" "Bottomland. Excellent soil for corn and wheat. We will build a house there someday, start a family. It will be our legacy." He smiled, and for a moment, he looked almost kind. "Sign here, darling. It is the first step toward everything I promised you." She signed Emma Reese in her careful hand and watched Lund take the paper to the clerk. The man stamped it, filed it in a wooden box, and handed Lund a receipt. Outside, Lund folded the receipt into his coat pocket and squeezed her shoulder gently. "You have done well," he said warmly. "I am proud of you, Emma. Truly." Emma felt a flicker of warmth at the praise and hated herself for it. Over the following days, she learned the rhythms of the ranch. She cooked for Lund, and his hired men mended clothes, hauled water from the well, and kept the house in order. The men, Dark Dave Fritz Hoffman and a quiet Mexican hand named Carlos, treated her with the wary politeness men give a boss's property. They did not speak to her unless necessary, and they never met her eyes. Fritz was different. He was young, perhaps 19, with a sunburned face and a nervous energy that made him fidget whenever Bearclaw was near. One afternoon, while Emma was scrubbing laundry in a wooden tub behind the house, he approached and cleared his throat. "Ma'am," he said, twisting his hat in his hands. "I just wanted to say, if you need anything, you can ask me. I know it is hard coming to a new place." Emma looked up, surprised by the kindness in his voice. "Thank you, Mr. Hoffman." "Fritz," he corrected quickly. He glanced toward the barn where Bearclaw was shoeing a horse, then lowered his voice. "I came out here last year to earn money. I have family back in Ohio, my mother and 2 sisters. I am hoping to bring them west when I have saved enough." Emma nodded slowly, recognizing the same desperate hope that had brought her here. "That is a good goal." Fritz hesitated, then said quietly, "Just keep your head down, ma'am. Do not cross him. He has a temper, but if you stay quiet and do your work, you will be all right." He walked away before she could respond, leaving her with the uneasy sense that he had said both too much and not enough. A week later, Dr. Benjamin arrived at the ranch in a rattling buggy summoned to treat a ranch hand who had broken his arm in a fall from a horse. Benjamin was a tall, stooped man in his 50s, with graying hair and tired eyes that had seen too much suffering. He set the bone with practiced efficiency, wrapped it in splints, and accepted a cup of coffee from Emma. As Lund walked the injured man back to the bunkhouse, Benjamin glanced around the kitchen and said quietly, "How are you faring, Mrs. Lund?" Emma forced a smile. "Well enough, Doctor." He studied her face, noting the shadows under her eyes and the way she held her left wrist as if it still pained her. "If you ever need help," he said carefully, "my office is on 3rd Street in Sagebrush. The door is always open." Emma looked down at her hands. "Thank you." Benjamin left without saying more, but Emma felt the weight of his concern. At least someone had noticed. That evening, as the sun set blood-red over the prairie, Bearclaw called Emma into his office. It was a cramped room off the main hall, cluttered with ledgers, maps, and stacks of paper. He gestured to a chair. "Sit, darling." She sat. He placed a new document on the desk in front of her, along with a steel-nibbed pen and a bottle of ink. "This is a transfer deed," he said, his voice calm and reasonable. "It moves the homestead claim you filed last week into my name. Standard practice for married couples. It simplifies things legally and ensures that our holdings are managed as a unified whole." Emma's throat tightened. "Why do we need to do that?" "Because, Emma, I am the one managing the property. I am the one building fences, digging wells, making improvements. The law requires the claim to be in your maiden name at first, but there is no reason we cannot consolidate ownership now. It protects us both." He leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Surely you trust me." She stared at the paper. The document was already filled out, dated the day after their marriage. All it needed was her signature. "But the land is mine. The law." "The law," Lund interrupted gently, "also recognizes a husband's authority over his household. I am not taking anything from you, Emma. I am organizing our assets for the greater good. This territory will be built by men of vision, men willing to make difficult decisions. Women play their part by supporting that vision. It is a sacred duty." She looked up at him, searching his scarred face for truth. She found only patience and a faint hint of disappointment, as if her hesitation wounded him deeply. "I just want to understand," she said. He sighed and leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "Let me tell you something, darling. 5 years ago, I came to this territory with nothing but a rifle and a dream. I filed my homestead, worked the land, fought off claim jumpers and savages. I built this ranch with my own sweat and sacrifice. Now I have a chance to build something even greater, a legacy that will endure for generations. But I cannot do it alone. I need a partner, someone who understands that progress requires sacrifice. I thought that was you." Emma felt guilt twist in her chest. He had given her a home security, a future, and she was repaying him with suspicion. "I do trust you," she said quietly. "Then sign." She picked up the pen. Her hand trembled. She hesitated, and in that moment of hesitation, her elbow knocked against a stack of papers on the desk's edge. A heavy ledger tumbled to the floor, pages spilling open. Bearclaw lunged to gather them, but Emma was faster. She knelt and picked up the ledger, her eyes scanning the open page. A list of names stared back at her. Women's names written in Bearclaw's elegant hand. Beside each name was a maiden name, a date, a train depot, a claim number, and a parcel description. Next to several names was a notation in red ink: "Deceased property transferred. Margaret O'Connor, deceased. Helene Richter, deceased. Abigail Frost, deceased." 7 names in all, 7 women. Emma's hands went numb. She looked up at Bearclaw, who was watching her with an expression of calm regret. "What is this?" she whispered. He did not answer immediately. He took the ledger from her hands, With deliberate care, closed it and set it on the desk. Then he sat down and folded his hands as if preparing to deliver a sermon. "That, darling, is the ledger of progress," he said quietly. "This territory is being built on the backs of those willing to sacrifice. Some give their labor, some give their land, and some regrettably give their lives. It is not pleasant, but it is necessary. I do not expect you to understand immediately, but in time you will see the wisdom of it." "You killed them," Emma said, her voice rising. "All of them." "I fulfilled my duty," he corrected gently. "Each of those women came here understanding the risks. They filed their claims, contributed their part, and when they proved unsuitable, they made their final sacrifice for the greater good. It is unfortunate, but civilization is built on difficult choices. I bear that burden so others do not have to." Emma's breath came in gasps. She backed toward the door, horror clawing at her throat. "You are insane." "I am visionary," Lund said, still calm. He stood and approached her slowly, like a man approaching a skittish horse. "And you, Emma, will join that vision. You will sign the deed tomorrow after you have had time to reflect. You will do it willingly, or you will do it in desperation. Either way, the land will serve its purpose, and so will you." She turned to run, and he moved faster than she thought possible. He grabbed her by the hair and dragged her backward, his hand covering her mouth before she could scream. "This is more difficult than I had hoped," he murmured in her ear, his voice still soft, still patient. "But every great work requires patience. You will learn, Emma. They all do in the end." He hauled her out of the house, ignoring her struggles, and dragged her to the corn crib. Fritz emerged from the bunkhouse, eyes wide with shock, but froze when Bearclaw looked at him. "Mr. Hoffman," Lund said pleasantly, "if you interfere, I will write to your mother in Ohio and inform her that you have been stealing from me. I will ensure that warrants are issued and that your sisters are left destitute. Do we understand each other?" Fritz's face went pale. He opened his mouth, then closed it, and finally nodded. "Excellent," Lund said. "I am glad we are all clear on our duties." He threw a lariat rope over a roof beam, tied Emma's wrists, and hoisted her until her toes scraped the ground. She sobbed, begging, but he only smiled, that same gentle, terrible smile. "By tomorrow, you will sign," he said softly. "Not because I force you, but because you will understand that it is the right thing to do. Sacrifice is the price of civilization, Emma, and you will pay it gladly." He left the water jug on the crate, locked the door, and walked away whistling a hymn. And that was where Tasunke found her hours later as the sun bled crimson over the horizon. Now, as Tasunke led Emma away from the crib toward his waiting horse, the last light bled from the sky. A second pony stood beside his mount, a sturdy mare with a blanket saddle. He helped Emma onto the mare's back, cupping his hands to lift her when her legs would not hold. She swayed in the saddle, dizzy. He looped a rawhide thong from her saddle horn to his, keeping the horses close as he took the lead toward the northwest, toward Lakota country. Behind them, a shout rang out. Dark Dave had returned to the crib and found it empty. His voice carried across the prairie, sharp with alarm. Within minutes, riders appeared on the ridge behind them, dust rising against the darkening sky. Tasunke urged the horses into a canter. Emma clung to the saddle horn, every jolt sending pain through her bruised body. They reached Storm Creek and plunged into the ford. The water was deeper than it looked, tugging at the horses' legs. Emma's mare slipped on a slick stone and nearly went down. Tasunke lunged sideways, grabbing the bridle, his boots digging into the creek bed as the current pulled. For a moment, it seemed as if all three would be swept away. Then the mare found footing and lurched forward, scrambling up the far bank. A gunshot cracked behind them, the bullet whining past Emma's head and smacking into a cottonwood. Bark exploded. Tasunke thrust a revolver into Emma's shaking hand. "Hold high. Point. No close eyes." She raised the gun sighted along the barrel as best she could and pulled the trigger. The recoil nearly knocked her from the saddle and the shot went wild. But the pursuers ducked and reined in, giving Tasunke time to drive their horses into the shelter of the trees. They rode hard for an hour, following the creek, through broken country, where the moon cast jagged shadows. When the sound of pursuit faded, Tasunke slowed and led Emma to a low rise, where an abandoned line shack leaned against the wind. Inside the shack was bare, except for a broken chair and a scattering of old straw. Tasunke wedged the door shut with a length of timber and checked the single window. Moonlight slanted through gaps in the walls. He showed Emma how to rest the rifle barrel along the window frame, aligning her stance with brief touches to her elbow and shoulder. Their faces were inches apart in the narrow space, his breath warm against her cheek. "If they come," he said, "shoot first. No, wait." Emma nodded, her hands still trembling. She looked at him in the moonlight, this stranger who had cut her down and risked everything to save her. "Why are you helping me?" Tasunke was silent for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was low and measured. "Your man steals water, builds dam. Last year his men killed my brother. Say he steal cattle. No trial, just bullet." He paused, his dark eyes meeting hers. "I watch his ranch. See women come on train, never see them leave. Now I know why." Emma's throat tightened. "I am sorry about your brother." "You, not him," Tasunke said simply. "But you tied to him. His papers say you his. If I leave you, he'd take you back, make you sign. Then you die like others. And if you take me with you, then we fight, or die trying." He met her eyes, and in that moment, Emma saw no pity, only a hard, clear understanding of what survival required. "You choose." Emma looked down at the rifle in her hands. She thought of the ledger, the names of 7 dead women, the man who had spoken of sacrifice and duty while planning her murder. She thought of the water jug, left just out of reach, a calculated cruelty designed to break her will. "I choose to fight," she said. Tasunke nodded once, as if her answer was exactly what he had expected. "Good. Fighting, maybe we live." They did not sleep that night. Tasunke sat by the door, rifle across his knees, listening to the wind and the distant howl of coyotes. Emma sat by the window, watching the empty prairie and learning the weight of the gun in her hands. Once, when exhaustion tugged at her eyes, Tasunke spoke quietly. "Stay awake. Dream later." Emma forced her eyes open and thought of the women whose names she had seen in the ledger. She would not join them. At dawn, they mounted again and rode toward the Lakota camp. The grassland rolled away in every direction, broken only by low ridges and the thin line of Storm Creek, winding through it like a silver thread. Tasunke rode in silence, his gaze scanning the horizon with the easy vigilance of a man who had learned to read danger in the shape of dust and the behavior of birds. Emma followed, her body aching, but her resolve hardening with each mile. They reached the camp by mid-morning. It was a broad meadow carved by the creek, sheltered on 3 sides by low hills. Hide lodges ringed a central fire pit. Ponies grazed among willows at the water's edge. Children stopped their games to stare as Tasunke rode in with a white woman clinging to the saddle horn. An older woman stepped forward, her face lined with years and grief. Her name was Gola, and her son had been the boy killed by Bear Claw's men a year earlier. She looked at Emma with hard, unforgiving eyes and spoke rapidly in Lakota. Tasunke answered in the same language, his tone firm. Emma understood none of it, but she saw the anger in Gola's face, and the wary glances of the others who gathered around. Finally, Tasunke switched to English. She say I bring enemy to our home. I say you enemy of our enemy. Gola spat into the dust. His woman, his paper, his trouble. She pointed at Emma's wrists, still wrapped in torn cloth. You think he not come for her? You think he let her go? He bring guns here. Soldiers, maybe. You bring war. He already war, Tasunke said quietly. Dam on creek, fence on hunting ground, bullets for my brother. This woman, she not want his war. She run from it. Gola's eyes flicked to Emma, searching for truth. Emma met her gaze and did not look away, despite the fear that made her hands shake. What she want? Gola asked. Emma spoke before Tasunke could answer. I want him to pay for what he has done. To me. To the women before me. To your son. Her voice cracked, but she forced it steady. I cannot do it alone. But I will do it, even if it kills me. Gola studied her for a long moment, then turned away. Keep her away from the children, she said in English. She bring death with her. But she did not order Emma to leave. Tasunke led Emma to a small lodge at the edge of the camp. Inside it was dim and cool, smelling of smoke and sage. He brought her water and a blanket, and she sank onto the packed earth, exhaustion crashing over her like a wave. Over the following days, Emma learned the rhythms of the camp. She carried water from the creek, helped Gola grind corn on a flat stone, and bandaged a child's scraped knee with steady hands. She did not speak unless spoken to, and she worked without complaint. Slowly, the camp's suspicion began to soften, though Gola's eyes remained cold. One afternoon, Tasunke took Emma to see the dam. They rode upstream to where Bear Claw's earthwork rose like a scar across the creek bed. The water pooled behind it, slow and stagnant, while downstream the Lakota fields withered. He build this, Tasunke said, gesturing to the dam, and say law on his side. Say he file paper. Say land his now. Emma stared at the dam, her mind working. The homestead claims. He is not just stealing water. He is using the women's land to control the creek. Each claim gives him a new parcel, a new piece of the water rights. Tasunke looked at her sharply. You understand his plan? I understand he is not just a killer, Emma said bitterly. He's building an empire on their graves. And he believes he's doing the right thing. That is what makes him so dangerous. That evening, Dr. Benjamin arrived at the camp on his rounds. He rode in with his black medical bag, having been called to treat a man who had broken his leg in a fall from a horse. When he saw Emma, he stopped dead. Mrs. Lund, he said, astonished. The whole town thinks you are dead. Lund said you ran off and were likely killed by Indians or bandits. Emma felt cold fury rise in her chest. He is a liar and a murderer. Benjamin dismounted and knelt beside her, examining her wrists and the bruises that still darkened her face. Tell me everything, Emma told him. She described the ledger, the list of women the homestead claims filed, and transferred the notation beside each name. She told him about the corn crib and the rope and the water jug left just out of reach. She told him about Bear Claw's calm, soft voice as he spoke of duty and sacrifice. Benjamin's face grew pale. I have signed death certificates for 2 of his wives, he said slowly. Both ruled accidental. One supposedly drowned in the creek, another fell from a horse. I should have questioned it, but he was so convincing, so reasonable. That is how he works, Emma said. He makes you believe that what he does is necessary, that it is for the greater good. Benjamin looked at Tasunke. We need that ledger. Without it, it is just her word against his. And in Sagebrush, a man like Bear Claw can make accusations disappear. Tasunke nodded slowly. Then we take ledger. Emma's heart quickened. I know where he hides it, under a loose plank in his office floor beneath a big desk. But it is locked in the house. He will have guards. Then we go at night, Tasunke said. Quiet, fast. Benjamin stood, his expression troubled. You understand what you are risking. If Lund catches you, he will not leave you alive to testify. And even if you succeed, there is no guarantee the law will care. Judge Harrow is due in town next week for water rights hearings, but he has been friendly to the big ranchers in the past. Friendly or bought? Emma asked. Benjamin hesitated. I do not know. But be prepared for the possibility that even with evidence, justice may not come easy. That night, as the camp settled into sleep, Tasunke's cousin Sihu joined them by the fire. Sihu was quieter than Tasunke, with a long scar across his forearm and eyes that had seen too many fights. He listened to the plan without speaking, then nodded once. I go, he said simply. But before they could leave, Fritz Hoffman rode into camp on a lathered horse, his face pale and his hands shaking so badly he could barely hold the reins. He dismounted and approached Emma with desperate red-rimmed eyes. Ma'am, he said, his voice breaking, I am so sorry. I am so sorry. Emma stood slowly, dread coiling in her stomach like a snake. What did you do, Fritz? Fritz's face crumpled. He asked where you went. He kept asking, and I kept saying I did not know, and then His voice broke entirely. Tears streamed down his face. He said if I did not tell him, he would assume I helped you escape. He said he would write to my mother, tell her I was a horse thief and a traitor. He said he would make sure warrants were sent to Ohio. My sisters would lose the house. They would be thrown into the street. My mother is sick, ma'am. She cannot work. They would starve. Emma felt her blood turn to ice. You told him I am here. Fritz nodded, his whole body shaking with sobs. He is gathering men right now. They will be here by dawn. I tried to be strong, but I could not let my family die. I could not. But I rode here as fast as I could to warn you. Maybe you can run? Maybe. How many men? Tasunke interrupted, his voice hard. 6, maybe 7, armed. He is not calling the law or the cavalry. He says this is personal. He says he will handle it himself. Gola, who had been listening from the edge of the firelight, spoke in Lakota. Tasunke answered, then turned to Emma. She say we fight here, many die. Children die. We must lead him away. Where? Emma asked. Tasunke thought for a moment, then said, town. If we bring Ledger to judge before he catch us, maybe law stronger than his guns. Emma looked at Fritz, who was still weeping. Part of her wanted to hate him. Part of her understood the impossible choice he had faced. Can you slow him down? Give us time. Fritz wiped his face with shaking hands. I will try, but he does not trust me anymore. I do not know what I can do. Do anything, Emma said. Please. Fritz nodded, climbed back on his horse, and rode into the darkness, his shoulders slumped with shame. Tasunke, Sihu, and Emma prepared quickly. They would ride to the ranch under cover of remaining darkness, retrieve the ledger, and race for sagebrush before Bear Claw could intercept them. It was desperate, but it was all they had. As they mounted, Gola approached Emma and pressed something into her hand. It was a small pouch of dried herbs. For pain, she said gruffly. And because you not run when you could. Emma closed her fingers around the pouch. Thank you. Gola said nothing more, but her eyes were no longer quite so cold. They reached the ranch an hour before dawn. The house was dark, but lanterns burned in the bunkhouse where Bear Claw was gathering his men. Tasunke led them to the back of the house, where a window stood slightly ajar. Emma climbed through first, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst. Inside, the house smelled of cigar smoke and old wood. She moved through the darkened hallway to the office, every board beneath her feet a potential betrayal. Tasunke and Sihu were silent shadows behind her. Their breathing controlled their movements, precise. The office door was locked. Tasunke produced a thin piece of metal, a bent nail sharpened to a point, and worked the lock until it clicked. The sound, though soft, seemed deafening in the silence. Emma held her breath. Inside, moonlight spilled across the big desk. Emma knelt and felt along the floorboards beneath it, searching for the loose plank. Her fingers were slick with sweat. Every second felt like an eternity. Her fingers found the edge. She pried it up and froze. Beneath the plank was not just the ledger. It was a steel box, locked and chained with a massive bear trap set around it. The trap's teeth gleamed in the moonlight, poised to snap shut on anyone who reached for the box. The spring mechanism was so tightly wound that even the faint vibration of Emma's breath seemed to make it quiver. "What in blazes?" Emma breathed. Tasunke knelt beside her and studied the trap with narrowed eyes. He pulled a long stick from his pack, a piece of kindling he had picked up outside, and carefully, with agonizing slowness, positioned it near the trap's trigger plate. Sweat beaded on his forehead. His hands, normally so steady, trembled slightly. Emma could see the muscles in his jaw clenched tight. He glanced at her once, and in that brief look, she saw what he was thinking. If this goes wrong, we die here. He pressed the stick down. The trap snapped shut with a vicious clang that echoed through the house like a gunshot. The stick shattered into splinters. Emma's heart stopped. For 3 endless seconds, they did not move. Then footsteps. Heavy boots on the stairs. "Someone's in the house." Dark Dave's voice, sharp with alarm. Tasunke grabbed a heavier tool from his belt, a short pry bar, and attacked the lock on the steel box with desperate speed. The metal groaned. Emma's hands shook as she helped him lever the lid open. Inside were the ledger, bundled deeds, and a set of branding irons with removable tips. She grabbed them, wrapping everything in her shawl. The footsteps were closer now, coming down the hall. Tasunke gestured toward the window. Sihu was already there, throwing it open. But the window faced the front of the house, where lantern light now flickered. Emma's mind raced. She grabbed a heavy paperweight from the desk and hurled it through the opposite window toward the back of the house. Glass exploded with a crash. Dark Dave's footsteps stopped and then changed direction, running toward the sound. "Now," Tasunke hissed. They dove through the open window on the front side, hit the ground hard, and sprinted for the horses. Gunfire erupted behind them, bullets punching through the walls. Sihu vaulted into his saddle, but as Emma mounted, a shot rang out and Sihu grunted, clutching his side. Blood spread across his shirt, black in the moonlight. "Ride," Tasunke shouted. They rode hard into the breaking dawn, and the ledger and irons clutched against Emma's chest. Behind them, Bear Claw's voice rose in cold, controlled fury, not shouting, but commanding. And within minutes, the pursuit began in earnest. Emma glanced back and saw 7 riders, maybe more, dust rising like a storm behind them. Bear Claw led the charge, his face a mask of grim determination. They fled across the open prairie, the horses stretching into a desperate gallop. Sihu was fading, slumped forward in his saddle, his breathing ragged. Blood dripped onto his horse's neck, leaving a trail. Tasunke rode beside him, holding him upright with one hand, his face tight with anguish. Ahead, the land broke into a series of low ridges. Tasunke steered them toward a scatter of boulders that offered the only cover for miles. They dismounted and took positions among the rocks. Sihu collapsed against a stone, breathing hard. Emma tore strips from her skirt and pressed them against his wound, but the blood kept coming, soaking through the fabric, faster than she could staunch it. How bad? Tasunke asked quietly, though he already knew the answer. Bad. Emma said, her voice breaking. Bullets began to crack against the rocks. Bear Claw's men spread out, tightening the ring. Emma loaded the rifle and returned fire, her hands steadier now. She was no longer the terrified bride in the corn crib. She was a woman with nothing left to lose. Tasunke fired in careful, measured shots, making every cartridge count. But the ammunition would not last, and Sihu was dying. Emma scanned the prairie beyond their position and saw in the distance a herd of longhorns grazing near a narrow draw. An idea sparked in her mind, reckless, desperate, but possible. "The cattle," she said. "If we can drive them toward that draw, we can use the stampede to scatter his men." Tasunke followed her gaze, then nodded. "We run. Drive cattle, or die here." Sihu coughed blood flecking his lips and spoke in Lakota. Tasunke answered, his voice tight with emotion. Sihu shook his head and said something else, firm and final. "What did he say?" Emma asked. "He say he stay. Hold them here. Give us time." Emma looked at Sihu, this quiet man who had followed them without question, and felt her throat tighten. "No, we take him with us." Sihu met her eyes and shook his head. "No time," he said in broken English. He pressed his rifle into Tasunke's hands, then gripped his cousin's forearm in a warrior's farewell. "For my brother, for your brother, stop him." Tasunke's jaw clenched. For a moment, Emma thought he would refuse. Then he gripped Sihu's arm in return hard and nodded once. They broke from cover in a sudden dash, firing as they ran for their horses. Bear Claw's men surged forward, but Sihu's rifle cracked from the rocks once, twice, 3 times, forcing the pursuers to scatter and take cover. Emma and Tasunke rode hard toward the herd, the thunder of hooves behind them and the crack of gunfire echoing across the prairie. Behind them, Sihu's shots grew slower, more deliberate. Each one was a gift, a stolen second of life. Then silence. Emma did not look back. She could not bear to. They reached the cattle and wheeled their horses, shouting and firing into the air. The longhorns, already skittish from the distant gunfire, surged to their feet in a bellow of confusion and fear. Tasunke cracked a discarded whip he had grabbed from a fence line, and Emma fired her rifle into the ground near the herd's edge. The cattle broke into a run, horns clashing and hooves pounding. The sound was like nothing Emma had ever heard. It was not just noise. It was a physical force, a wall of thunder that shook the earth beneath her horse's hooves. The ground trembled. Dust rose in a choking cloud that blotted out the sun, turning day to twilight. The bellowing of the cattle was a primal roar that drowned out the gunfire, drowned out thought itself. Bear Claw saw what they were doing. His face went pale, the first crack in his composed mask, and he tried to swing wide, yelling orders to his men to turn the herd. But the cattle, driven by terror and the narrow funnel of the draw, poured forward in a living avalanche of muscle and horn. Emma rode along the edge of the stampede, her horse's flanks heaving with exertion. The air was thick with dust and the smell of earth and fear. She could barely see. Ahead through the haze, she spotted an old gate blocking the mouth of an arroyo. If it held, the cattle would scatter and they would be caught. She spurred forward, every muscle screaming, and reached for the gate. It was half-rotted, the posts leaning at drunken angles. She grabbed the top rail with both hands and pulled. Nothing. The gate was jammed, swollen shut by rain and time. The herd was 50 yards away. 40, 30. Emma's horse reared, terrified. She nearly fell. Behind her, Bear Claw closed in, raising his revolver. Then she remembered. The rope. The same lariat rope that Tasunke had cut from her wrists in the corn crib, now coiled on her saddle. She grabbed it, looped it around the top of the gatepost, and wrapped the other end around her saddle horn. Hiya! She drove her horse backward with all her strength. The rope went taut. The post groaned. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then the rusted nails gave way with a shriek of tortured wood. The gate exploded outward, boards flying, and the herd poured through like water through a broken dam. Emma's horse stumbled its legs, tangled in the remnants of the rope. She pitched forward, hit the ground hard, and rolled. Hooves churned the earth inches from her head. Dust choked her. She could not see, could not breathe. A hand closed around her arm and yanked her upright. Tasunka, his face a mask of dirt and determination, hauled her onto his horse behind him. They lurched forward as the stampede roared past. Two of Bear Claw's men were caught in the crush and swept from their saddles. One crawled clear with a shattered leg. The other did not move as the herd thundered over him. The stampede scattered Bear Claw's remaining men in all directions. Dust hung in the air like a shroud. Emma and Tasunki drove their exhausted horse toward the shallow ford near Sagebrush. But Bear Claw, relentless and unyielding, caught up at the water's edge. His horse splashed into the stream, and he leveled a revolver at Tasunke. His scarred face was calm again, the moment of fear erased. "You cost me men, land, and reputation," he said quietly, almost conversationally. "But I reckon that is the price of progress. You will die knowing you changed nothing. And you, Emma, you will die knowing you were nothing more than another sacrifice for a greater purpose." Tasunke moved sideways, deliberately putting himself between the gun and Emma. "You done," he said simply. The revolver roared. The bullet grazed Tasunke's shoulder, spinning him sideways into the shallows. Bear Claw spurred his horse forward, intent on trampling the fallen man. Emma, kneeling in the stream, remembered the lesson in the line shack. Rest the barrel. Breathe. Do not close your eyes. She braced the rifle across a rock, lined up the sight, and drew a single breath. Bear Claw loomed in her vision, close and clear and monstrous. She fired. The bullet struck him in the chest, punching him backward off his horse. He hit the water hard, blood blooming red against the current. Emma lowered the rifle hands, shaking. Tasunke dragged himself upright, clutching his wounded shoulder, and waded toward Bear Claw. The man was still alive, gasping, blood bubbling at his lips. But even now, dying in the creek, he did not scream or curse. He looked up at Emma with something like pity. "You think you won," he whispered. "You think this changes anything? There will be others like me. The work will continue. Civilization requires sacrifice. You are just another sacrifice." Emma knelt in the water beside him, her face hard. "Maybe. But you will not be there to see it." She and Tasunke bound Bear Claw's wrists with the same rope that had hung her in the corn crib and dragged him half-conscious and bleeding toward Sagebrush. Fritz appeared from the tree line, his face ashen. "I tried to slow him down," he said, his voice hollow. "I cut a saddle girth, let a horse loose. It was not enough." "It was enough," Emma said, though she was not sure she believed it. "We are alive." Fritz looked at Bear Claw, bleeding and bound, and swallowed hard. "What now?" "Now," Emma said, "we make sure the world hears the truth." They arrived in Sagebrush at midday, mud-spattered, blood-streaked, and exhausted. Curious faces crowded the boardwalks. Some recognized Emma and stared as if seeing a ghost. Others eyed Tasunke with open hostility. Bear Claw, tied to a wagon wheel outside the courthouse, spoke in that same soft, reasonable voice. "She killed a man in cold blood. The Indian attacked me on my own land. They stole my property and murdered my men. I am the victim here." A crowd began to gather, angry voices rising. Someone yelled, "Hang the savage!" Another shouted, "That mail-order girl got what she deserved." Dr. Benjamin pushed through the mob and ushered Emma Tasunke and Fritz into the courthouse before the violence could erupt. Inside, Judge Samuel Harrow sat at a table reviewing water rights documents. He was a lean man, with sharp eyes and a face that gave nothing away. When he saw the blood-stained group enter, he set down his papers with deliberate slowness. "What is the meaning of this?" he asked coldly. Emma laid the ledger on the table with trembling hands. "Your Honor, this is evidence of fraud, murder, and conspiracy. Henrik Lund has been killing women and stealing their land for years." Judge Harrow did not touch the ledger. He looked at Emma, then at Tasunka, then at the blood on the floor. "That is a serious accusation, Mrs. Lund. Do you have proof, or just wild claims made by a runaway wife and a savage?" Emma's heart sank. Benjamin had been right. The judge was not their ally. But she opened the ledger anyway and pointed to the list of names. 7 women, Your Honor. All brought west as mail-order brides. All filed homestead claims in their maiden names. All dead under suspicious circumstances. All their land transferred to Henrik Lund after their deaths. Judge Harrow finally picked up the ledger and flipped through it, his expression unreadable. The silence stretched like a rope pulled taut. Then he spoke, his voice still cold. "This is Henrik Lund's handwriting. I have seen it on dozens of land claims." "Then you know," Emma began. "I know nothing yet," Harrow interrupted. "Handwriting proves he kept records. It does not prove murder." He looked at her. "Do you have witnesses?" Dr. Benjamin stepped forward. "Your Honor, I signed death certificates for 2 of those women. Both were ruled accidental, but I never examined the bodies. I should have questioned it, but Henrik Lund is a persuasive man. He convinced me that everything was in order." Fritz spoke up, his voice shaking. "I worked for Lund. I saw women arrive and disappear. I was too afraid to speak up because he threatened my family. But I am speaking now. That ledger is real. Everything in it is real." Judge Harrow set the ledger down and leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. For a long moment he said nothing. Emma felt despair rising in her throat. Then Harrow called for the bailiff. "Bring Henrik Lund inside. Now." Bearclaw was dragged in wrists, still bound, blood soaking his shirt. But even wounded and captive, he carried himself with dignity. He looked at the judge with calm respect. "Your Honor," he said quietly, "I am the victim of a terrible conspiracy. My wife ran away with a savage who has been terrorizing my ranch. They have concocted this story to steal my land and destroy my reputation. I beg you to see through their lies." Judge Harrow opened the ledger and read aloud, his voice flat. "Margaret O'Connor, arrived June 1852, claim filed June 15th, deceased July 3rd, property transferred." He looked up. "Care to explain this, Mr. Lund?" "Tragic accident, Your Honor. She drowned in the creek. I was devastated. And Helene Richter, also drowned, fell from a horse. And Abigail Frost, Bearclaw's jaw tightened slightly. Another accident. The frontier is dangerous." 7 accidents, Harrow said. "All within 3 years, all resulting in property transfers to you." "I am a survivor, Your Honor. I do not apologize for that." Judge Harrow closed the ledger and looked at Bearclaw for a long moment. Then he said, "Mr. Lund, I have known you for 5 years. You have always presented yourself as a pillar of this community, a builder, a visionary." Bearclaw's face relaxed slightly. "I have tried to serve Your Honor, to bring order and progress to this territory. And yet," Harrow continued, his voice hardening, "I find it difficult to believe that 7 women could die by accident in your care. I find it difficult to believe that this ledger in your own hand is a forgery. And I find it very difficult to believe that a woman would hang herself in a corn crib and then run away. He gestured to Emma's wrists, still bandaged the rope burns visible beneath the cloth. Bear Claw's composure finally cracked. Your Honor, surely you understand that progress requires sacrifice. Those women played their part in building something greater than themselves. I did what was necessary for the good of your land holdings. Harrow interrupted. Not civilization, not progress. Your own greed. He stood. Henrik Lund, I am holding you for trial on charges of fraud, conspiracy, and murder. Your assets are frozen pending investigation. Bailiff, take him to the jail. As the bailiff stepped forward, something broke inside Bear Claw. It was not fear, it was the collapse of his carefully constructed identity. He had always believed he was righteous, visionary, chosen. Now, in front of the gathered crowd, that belief was being torn down. No, he said, his voice rising for the first time, losing its careful control. No, you do not understand. I built this territory. I brought order to chaos. Those women were nothing compared to what I created. You cannot. I can, Harrow said coldly. And I will. Bear Claw lunged toward the judge, but the bailiff and 2 deputies wrestled him to the ground. He fought them screaming now, all pretense of dignity gone. I am a builder, I am a visionary. You are destroying everything I worked for, everything. They dragged him away, still screaming, and the courtroom fell silent. Emma felt her legs give way. Tasunke caught her before she fell, his wounded shoulder forgotten, and held her steady. It is done, he said quietly. It is done, she echoed. Over the following months, and the wheels of justice ground slowly forward. Bear Claw's trial took place in a larger town presided over by a circuit judge. Emma testified, her voice steady, recounting every detail. Fritz sent a written statement from Ohio where he had returned to his family and doctorate. Benjamin provided medical testimony about the suspicious deaths. The jury deliberated for 2 days. In the end, they found Henrik Lund guilty of fraud, conspiracy, and 3 counts of murder. The evidence for the other deaths was not sufficient, but it was enough. He was sentenced to 30 years in a state prison. When the sentence was read, Bear Claw did not scream or plead. He simply sat in silence, staring at nothing, his sense of self shattered beyond repair. The dam across Storm Creek was dismantled by court order, and the water flowed free again. Some of Bear Claw's stolen homesteads were returned to families back east. Others remained tangled in legal disputes for years. But the Lakota fields turned green again, and the children played by the water's edge, without fear. Emma filed a claim for a small parcel of land between the town road and the Lakota Valley. With Dr. Benjamin's help, she built a way station, a simple structure with a well, a lean-to for shelter, and a corral for horses. She kept a lantern burning in the window every night, visible for miles across the dark prairie. Travelers of all kinds stopped to water their horses and rest, white settlers, Lakota riders, Mexican traders, families fleeing bad situations. Emma charged nothing and asked only that visitors leave the place as they found it. Some called it foolishness. Others called it charity. But to those who stopped there cold and thirsty and far from home, it was something else, a beacon. A promise that in a hard land, kindness still existed. Tasunke brought horses to help Emma haul lumber and dig the well. They worked side by side through the changing seasons, their partnership built not on words, but on shared effort and mutual respect. When a beam slipped and nearly crushed Emma's foot, Tasunke caught it with his shoulder, and they held it together until it was secured. When Tasunke's wounded shoulder troubled him on cold mornings, Emma made poultices from Gola's herbs and bandaged it without comment. One spring evening, as the prairie bloomed with wildflowers, Emma stood outside the way station and watched the sun set in shades of gold and crimson. Tasunke stood beside her, silent and steady. "Do you think it was worth it?" she asked quietly. "All the pain, all the loss." Tasunke looked at the horizon where the sun was sinking beyond the distant hills. "See who gone? Your 7 women gone. My brother gone. Nothing bring them back. Then was it worth it?" He turned to her, his dark eyes meeting hers. "They die in darkness. We bring light. Maybe that enough." Emma felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them away. She reached out and took his hand. His fingers closed around hers, warm and calloused, and they stood together as the light faded and the first stars appeared. The prairie stretched around them, vast and indifferent. But here, in this small corner of it, a lantern burned against the darkness. And in that light, 2 survivors stood together, not because fate demanded it, not because law required it, but because they had chosen each other through blood and fire and hard-won trust. It was not a perfect ending. The world beyond the way station remained harsh and unjust. But it was enough. It was enough.